Hello, everybody. This is Charles from the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Not our usual intro today. For those of you who are stumbling onto this episode, let me just give you a bit of a heads up here. This is part 2 of our 2-part discussion of The Last Argument of Kings, the third and final installment of the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Dylan and I sat down and recorded this in one session and ended up taking over 2 hours, so we decided to split the recording into 2 episodes. If you did not hear the first part, you may want to jump over and check that out. That's our last episode. That's Last Argument of Kings Part 1. And Part 2 is today, where we will be discussing Baez and my hilarious Making a Magi segment. And then we will also be going into the endings for every single POV character in the book. It's a lot of fun, and we get into some really, really good stuff here. So, be sure to check it out. One warning though, spoiler warning here. If you have not read The First Law, or if you've not read Last Argument of Kings, I'm going to take Dylan's line here. Turn this down in your headphones, because we are getting into all kinds of spoilers for First Law trilogy. Otherwise, guys, enjoy the show. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get right to it. Which brings us to the next segment here, which I called, I don't know if you noticed, Making a Magi.
Yeah. No, I think you nailed that, Charles. I saw that in the notes and I was like, nice.
Because it's like, we finally, like, this was one of my favorite parts of my first read through, was this kind of understanding of Baez is true. Like, just like you knew he was like a not that likable guy, and that he was kind of had this contempt for people, but to get the full extent of it in these last moments is so good. It's what makes Baez like one of the best characters like I've ever, especially these wizard tropes and these mentor tropes. It's like Baez stands like in such a unique position in that world of like how like cold and conniving and like selfish he really is.
Yeah, exactly, Charles. This is the big reveal is Baez. And I think you can make the case, and on this reread, I probably would, that the First Law as a full story in this trilogy is more about Baez than any other character. Obviously, not the person we get the most time with or get to see the most internal, but the story of the First Law is about Baez and what he ends up being and doing and controlling, because like everything that has taken place in the First Law in one way or another kind of comes back to Baez making those decisions. And I've even heard Abercrombie call himself the Baez of the world. So it's like if Baez has full control, and even things that we like never would have thought come back to like, oh, Baez controlled that. And also the biggest reveals are like are Baez related. So and the First Law is the name of the trilogy, right? And
Right.
who is that most relevant to? It's Baez.
Well, for sure. I mean, every single plot point that came out of this was in some way or another orchestrated by Baez. And the cruel thing about it is, like, it was kind of like a side thing for Baez. Baez was making these decisions that was affecting all these people's lives, and it was almost like a side plot to what he was really trying to do. He's like, yeah, I'll set them up to do that, and I'll send them to the end of the world, and I'll, kill these guys and whatever, bring these people up to power. And it was all just like 2 tiers down from like the high level chess game that he's trying to play. You start to realize like, oh wow, all of these politics and things that all these other characters care about are really just like white noise to Baez and Khalul. Like, that's really it. Like, that's what this whole world is these two competing with each other, and not even just through armies, it's through everything.
Exactly. it's Baez and Kalul's world, and everyone else is just living in it.
Exactly right. So in this section called Making a Magi, we have Kwai, Baez, Pharaoh, Yulwei in the House of the Maker, right? In an attempt to find weapons to fight the Eaters. And that's when Pharaoh finally discovers the seed. It wasn't on the other end of the world. It was right in the center of it the whole time.
Who would have thunk it, Charles?
Who would have
And that's
thought?
another great Abercrombie subversion,
It's like,
right?
you're trying to
You
hide
go
a stone.
yeah,
Where are you going to put it?
exactly. So, yeah, seed was right there, and Pharaoh is instantly interested in this object.
Yep, she's
So
drawn to it. And Baez is like ordering her to take it to the palace. And in all the commotion, Malachus Kwai reveals himself to be Ptolemy.
Yeah, and obviously this has been built a lot. We know that Kwai's been acting sketchy basically since the end of the Blade itself. We know that
He's
there's
been
even a
talking
moment
back.
where it's like
He's
no
been a
one,
little sulky.
yeah, like no one would eat the rotted fish at one point. And it's like Kwai seemed pretty interested in it, and it's like
I remember that, but that's true.
Yeah, it's like that's strange, and he wouldn't ever eat like real food, and so Kwai, and he also has that moment where, or she, I guess, if it's Ptolemy, then she has that moment in Kwai's form where Baez, in Before They're Hanged, is out of commission, and she's like, oh, like, look, it's like the first of the Magi, vulnerable. Like, any of us could just kill him right now.
Yeah.
And then someone like Logan or someone's like, yeah, but why would you do that? And she's like, oh, no, no, nothing. But I am kind of, it does confuse, that's always the thing that confuses me most with the Ptolemy reveal is like, but then why didn't she?
That's true. I think she was trying to get the seed to open the door or something.
Oh, so she's really, I guess in my head, I'd always thought, like, I know that was like what she promised the voices, but I guess I always thought like her motivation would be more about vengeance on
the way I
Baez than
see
it would
it
be
is
about
that we see the warning signs of it with Pharaoh, of these voices trying to tell her how to open the gates. I think she's so possessed by these things, and their desire is to come out into the world, and I think she's hoping to. She needs Baez at that moment to get the tools she needs to open the gate or whatever, which is why, I mean, like you said, it's not the strongest case, but it is a case. It's like you could just kill Baez and then still figure it out, and at least Baez is dead. You know, like there's at least that. But I think I don't know. I think she needed to get out of the edge of the world and needed the seed, and so
that makes sense. I mean, it serves the story and being able to tell all of it in this way and have this cool reveal. And I think you make a great point with that was probably the intention from Abercrombie was like, well, she's hearing all these voices and she's been hearing them so long.
Yeah, and she's basically like she
died
basically, and the spirits like took her over. So is she even that Ptolemy, or is she just like, just the possessed version of Ptolemy? Like how much of the original Ptolemy is even left? Like those kind of things.
She seems pretty interested in killing Baez still.
Yeah, she does.
Like beyond just wanting the seed.
Yeah, but I think she's like, a bit far gone too, where it's like
for sure
her priority is freeing all of these evil demons and not getting revenge on Baez.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that mauled body that Klokta was investigating back in the old days was Kwai.
Right, because we never got that answer before, and we kind of forget it because it's such a small mystery in such a larger pool of more interesting questions that we forget. Oh yeah, that we never figured out who that body was, and now we get to find out.
Yeah, one of our first introductions to eaters. It's like we learned about eaters, and then we find body parts in the square, and it's like, that's strange. I guess the eaters are eating stuff as they do, but we didn't realize it was poor Kwai. And then I love that moment. It was like Logan was like thinking about all that work he did to save Kwai, and he thinks about the cooking pot, and I was like, oh man, that poor cooking.
Should have just left him. Taken the cooking pot.
But in one of these great moments, Yulwei fights Ptolemy.
Nailed
And
it.
as Baez and Pharaoh flee, Baez seals Yolway inside the house of the Maker. It's like, dude, that is cold.
Cold indeed, Charles. And Yolway gets the same treatment that a lot of the more noble characters seem to get in the first law by the end, where Yolway, it's kind of obviously a lot of different circumstances around it, but it's kind of like what you're talking about with Three Trees, where he gets to presumably die
Mhm.
here, locked away with Ptolemy in a way where he gets to kind of be a noble, heroic character. He's obviously been fooled and manipulated by Baez, but he's seems to be a good person at heart.
Yeah. And I think it's what's most interesting to me here is how quickly Baez was
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, great, lock him in. Like, that's good. Like, he's so self-absorbed that even one of the other magi, like, is just a tool to him that he could not care less about. And you learn more about the history of Ptolemy. It's like Ptolemy is just another one that he doesn't care about anyone. He's like such a narcissist and will do whatever it takes for power. And all these things about Baez reveal themselves in these making a magi moments where he's like, he's it's revealed that he may not have been so honest to Ptolemy, and he may not have been so honest to Yolway, and like all these ends to find the means, and he's happily locking up the only person you could, I guess, call his friend. He doesn't spare a second thought about. He's lucky he's out of there alive and has the tools to be more powerful. He's so focused on that, and it's alarming, but it's also so great.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the lies around Ptolemy, Charles, because I think the that's the biggest one for me, is
Yeah.
that we're kind of led to believe, oh, like Baez, he has all this kind of contempt for people, he's got this anger, all this kind of stuff, but his vulnerability, Charles, is that he really did love the Maker's daughter. So whatever he's done,
Yeah.
there's this almost human side to him where it's like, well, we can always relate to making mistakes because of the love we have for someone. And then this giant reveal, it's kind of led on at first by Yolway being like, I was kind of at the bottom of the bridge there or whatever, and I was looking up, and I know you said before that like the Master Maker threw his own daughter off and then she died and then you avenged her, but I feel like if I'm remembering correctly, the Master Maker fell first and then Ptolemy fell second. And Bias is like, like memory. It's been so long. Memory plays tricks on you, and that leads up to then
And then
like
Yolo was
this
like,
reveal that
promise me now. Like, you need to, like, convince me, And Bias is like, of course, man. Like, what do you think I am? Come on.
yeah, and around killing
And then
Juvens
I
too.
also think he was more than thrilled to seal him away because, like, Yolway was potentially the only one that could spread his secret about the origins of Ptolemy to the other magi and to anyone
Oh
else
yeah,
potentially of power. So he's like, oh, that covers that loose end. Like, he's like, oh, we'll go back and
exactly.
save him, but that he's hoping that he's dead because it's like, I get to keep that lie going. No one knows.
Oh yeah, and he also, one of the things too that Yolway made Baez promise was that he didn't kill Juvens. And Juvens is very interesting as kind of this backdrop character for the first law, because the way he's described eventually by Baez is like basically that Juvens was kind of this Gandalf type. Like he
Yeah.
legitimately probably was a straightforward, like kind wizard that cared for all the people, and people like that don't make it as long in Abercrombie's world because petty, awful people like Baez do away with them. And
Yeah.
obviously, we do find out that Juvens was just another victim of Baez's awful scheming.
Yeah, which is so good. Like, man,
Yes.
all these things coming together eh, has left such an impression on me. I'm like, this is like Abercrombieism right now. It's like all these realizations that are coming to light are the payoffs of this whole story. Like, these are the is what makes this series so unique, is how everything was, for lack of a better word here, I'm going to say the S word, subverted. And it's just so brilliant. And the more and more time Baez is going on with this, and it comes to a head when Baez uses the seed. Okay, so let's walk through this correctly. Khalul's eaters confront Baez in the Square of Marshals, right? And then you have Baez combining the powers of the seed and his training with Juvens and his training with the Master Maker,
Yes,
to create a whirlwind of power that destroys everything, and he's reveling in it. He's using Pharaoh to channel the power of the seed, right? To tapping in, like breaking the first law, basically, and is just causing mass destruction. And Baez could not be in more ecstasy. He's like, I'm more powerful than Juvens.
Yes.
like blowing up everybody. And you're like, oh God. This guy's got a bit of a complex.
Oh, yeah. Totally. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the first law, and there's a great quote from Baez. Baez has two quotes that are
this first
on
one
the
you're going to
first
say
law.
is my favorite. It's so good.
Okay, well, he says, power makes all things right. That is my first law and my last. That is the law. That is the only law that I acknowledge.
Oh, that's not the
when
one I was
Baez,
thinking of.
Oh, the other one is the first law. Rules are for children.
Yes.
This is war, and in war, the only crime is to lose.
That's the line.
So when we think about how Baez thinks about these laws, and even Baez himself has played the game of pretending that these first laws and these things like that are
to break the
important,
law
but they're
so
all
horrible.
yeah. Oh no, they broke, and it's so great too because there's like the first law is the one that even Khalul probably won't mess with, and like Khalul's minions are like, oh no, like dude, what are you doing? You're breaking the first law. Like, yeah, we'll eat people. That's just the second law. Like, dude, you're breaking the first law. And Baez, in the end, after all his talk about the importance of the first law, is like, oh no, that's just like what a childish way of thinking about things. We're out there killing each other, and like that line says, the only crime is to lose.
Exactly, which I love that line so much. It's very Machiavellian, and he has no problem using that kind of prejudice to make people hate the eaters. It's like, oh, they eat people,
Yes.
They break the law, they are evil, and we're good. And then when he get the first opportunity he gets to kill them, even if it means doing those things that he's been touting as evil, hypocritical almost of him, he doesn't care at all. Like, if anything, he's so happy with himself. And like, even after that, he's just like sitting there thinking about all the great things he did. He's like, man, no one can understand the great thing that I just did. He's like, I combined 3 different powers of magic. He's just like so happy, He's that, like, what he cares about, and like the only thing he cares about, and it's just so like funny and alarming at the same time, and it opens the story. It blows the story wide open, right? Like, I remember when I first read this and I saw the Kindle, I was like at 99%, and I was like, but wait, the story's just getting started. Like, we're finally figuring out the nature of Baez here. How could this be over? It's just like, it changes the whole perspective and scope of the whole story that we just read.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point of it. We've had a lot of discussions about first laws ending before off the air, because long before we were friends talking fantasy in capital letters, we were just friends talking fantasy in lowercase letters.
Yes.
And we've talked a lot about this ending, so we will get there in more detail, I'm sure, Charles, because I guess we have more plot to cover. But I do want to just quote the great Patrick Rothfuss here.
Ooh.
For author of the Kingkiller Chronicle, who sent a line in a video that actually a fan, also named Charles, emailed me. So shout out, Charles, if I don't think he's read First Law, so he probably isn't listening. But I'll say that in this video, Rothfuss says, if you're not paying attention to what's in this book, it is not my fault. And that's kind of how I feel about the ending of the first law, for those who feel that it doesn't come to a like conclusive ending or a climax or doesn't tie things together, because I think it does. I think it's just about seeing the hints. If you don't like the ending, you don't like the ending. I want to say that. Like, it's fine. You don't have to like it. And I think this is the story Abercrombie's been telling, and that's how it ends.
I think that's really well said, and I actually love that quote. Where it's like, if you're not paying attention to this, like what kind of story you're reading. We've said that countless times about Kingkiller Chronicles, and I think on my second read, like my first read through of Abercrombie, the ending always kind of felt like the bitter aftertaste of the experience of reading it. But then going into the reread, it's like I'm over it, man. I mean, like the story was so good, and it does feel wrapped up in a way. Like all these characters do get endings, and I feel like the story kind of comes to its climactic end here at the end of this making a magi moment
Yes.
with the siege ending and the battle being over, and then we just get like a long like final 20% of this book that's like wrap up. It's like a
Denouement.
denouement. It's a really interesting pacing of the story, but it's like, okay, the story ends. Baez is you like tricked everybody, used all these powers, and won like the day, but at what cost? And now we just see the denouement of all these characters, and I'm like, we did get a journey, and we got the rising action and the climax, and we got all of these things, and it's and I can also see now that I know that there's another trilogy coming out. I can see all the potential and how much is being set up and built in these moments, and like I'm curious. I know it takes place in the future in the same universe. That's all I know, and
Yeah.
I'm very excited at the potential of it. I don't know what characters make an appearance, but I can imagine, based off of what we know about certain characters, that we are building up for quite an interesting battle. Because even Baez says, like, oh, it's just been a personal feud between me and Khalul, and the magic in the world is fading, and we're fighting new wars in different ways, and a new age is coming, and all this stuff. Like, we get all of these ominous things, but it's like, same game, different players, basically, is what Baez is saying. Is like, yeah, we've been feuding constantly, and this war was just one of the pieces that we're feuding in. Like, money moves everything, and like all this other stuff, and it really opens up the first law, and like I don't know, and this it benefits from the reread for me because it's like you said, once you realize what story you're reading, it comes into place a lot better. At least that was my experience.
Charles, this is such a cathartic moment for me just to hear you. Because, yeah, I thought you might get that. I kind of got the sense that this reread was overall kind of more, I don't know if more enjoyable. So I don't want to use words for you here, but like that you appreciate some things
I
you
greatly
maybe,
enjoyed it the first time, but if you asked me
yeah.
before I cracked the cover again for the show, I would have been like, yeah, it's like this is what my father said when he read it. He's like, yeah, it's over the river and through the woods, but you don't get to grandma's house. And I was bought into that. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. And then I'm reading it again, and I'm like, well, we did kind of, and we just got a little more. And we got these other pieces, but we got the story, and I am softer on it than I used to be. I'll say that. And I think this benefited for me from the reread. Like, I really got to appreciate a lot more. Like you said, I appreciated Pharaoh a lot more. I appreciated Jazal a lot more. I mean, I always loved Jazal, but like to know where he's going and to see
Yes.
him fully in it is so funny.
I mean, even moments with Giselle, Abercrombie foreshadows extremely well. With
Yes.
Giselle, it's like he's admiring himself in the mirror, but the thing he most admires, the thing that's best about him, is that chin, that
And he
jaw,
acts
and
like
then
it's
what?
his like personal accomplishment, that he was
Yes,
born with the
of
chin,
course.
so it's like it all adds up. Yeah, his ability
Yeah,
to
and then he gets hit with a
pay
mace
off.
in his chin in particular.
Mm.
So it's like even those kind of moments where it's like, oh, of course he's focused on the chin, the jaw, because we know that's exactly where he's going to get hit by a mace. So it's like these kind of things that Abercrombie builds in are so great, and it's awesome to hear. It's like over the river and through the woods, and maybe you were expecting the first time around to get to grandma's house, but instead you walk into the house and Baez is sitting there in front of a chessboard of sorts, and that's kind of what happens to Glocta in this denouement. Is we get a chapter that's called answers.
Mhm.
After all these chapters that are called questions from Glocta, we get a chapter called questions.
Answers.
Or sorry, after all these, did I miss it both times?
No,
Or did I
you
get it
just
right
missed it the
first
last time.
Okay, at least I nailed one. So yes, after all the chapters called questions, we now get one called answers, and pretty much we get Baez just reveling in all of these things that we've talked about.
Baez
Charles
loves it. He doesn't even care that Glocta's there. He's just like impressed enough that he can brag to someone and they can actually appreciate the brag.
Yes.
Like, because no one on the planet Earth could understand the scope in which Baez has bragging rights except for Glocta, really.
Yes.
Like,
and maybe Khalul, but as Baez notes, he's probably not going to receive congratulations from Khalul anytime soon.
Right. That's its whole reason for existing is this feud with Khalul. So,
yes.
Yeah, it's so funny. So
Yeah.
Baez is just and maybe Pharaoh too. Like he has moments with Pharaoh that he's like talking about the accomplishments of his powers. Like, we got the vengeance you wanted, Pharaoh. And, it's like super thrilled. So it's really just them.
Yeah. I mean, Jazal has no idea what
Zero
is going on.
It's so funny
And
how
Baez. We get to
off-base
see
he is.
Baez kind of grow just annoyed with Jazal, where he's like starting to realize that Jazal so much doesn't get it that he thinks for a while like, oh, I'm king, like I must be the one with the actual power here. And Baez has kind of been reminding him for a while, like, no, not really, but it's been a little too gentle. And eventually Baez gets this moment with Jazal where it's like, it all comes to a head, and Baez is like, I've been way too lenient with you. I have to tell you what you are, who you are, and remind you who I am.
Yes.
And he reveals to Jazal some pretty amazing stuff, which is like, Jazal was in classic subversive fashion, we got this moment where Jazal was like the bastard child and rises to the throne, but Baez says, no, you were not actually the son of a king. You were just one of a bunch of children I spread out into the world with a chance, bought and spread out into the world with a chance to show the kind of features that would then become a person who I could raise to power and claim they were.
Yeah, he was like hedging his bets by having multiple people. He's like, it could have been you, it could have been Brent. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people, and you were just the one that like was coming together nicely for me. Like, you were the one that I chose. So, which is so good. And then he's like, you have no power. Like, I made you king. I built your whole story, and I built you, and you are nothing. So, like, really great. And you finally see Baez like kind of reveal his true nature a little bit too. He's going off on Jazal and inflicting horrible pain on him and basically daddying up on him and being like, you work for me, pal, and you do what I say or I'll find someone that can replace you because you're nothing, literally nothing except like the image that I need people to see so I can do my work. But you're so easy to replace and your position is so not a priority by any means, like that I'm not even going to be here. Like, I'm leaving you forever, but don't forget me because I am having people managing you in my stead, but I have better things to do. It's like, whoa.
Well said, Charles. And we kind of get left then with Jazal, like knowing he fears Baez, not knowing completely why, but at a very base level of like, Baez made me hurt a lot, and I guess I'm not going to mess with him anymore because
I don't want to feel that
he's got
again.
these magic. Yeah, like Baez basically just makes Jazal's guts wrench with total pain in his stomach and makes him just some pretty brutal stuff. And it's like Jazal isn't like, whoa, but like Baez is so like powerful and so manipulative that I can't mess with him. He's more just like, that guy hurt me and I don't want to get hurt again. So
it's like negative conditioning, So
we would call that positive punishment in the psych field there, Stutch. Charles.
Call me Stutch. Good old Stutch.
Shout out to Stutch.
That other friend of Dylan's that's not me.
Yeah. So.
But yes. Okay. Nothing positive about it, though.
Yeah. There's not. I mean, well, okay. I don't want to do this, but in psych, positive punishment means the presence. That's what positive is. Like a
Right.
positive.
It's not the connotation of
Yeah. Like
being good. It's the
yeah.
connotation of like being there.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And punishment is what everyone knows what punishment is. So uh, anyway, moving away from psych and back to the
So
story we're
Baez
talking about.
positively punishes Jazal.
Jazal.
Jazal
Yes.
is now like conditioned to fear Baez above all people, and
Exactly.
is now kind of falling more in line. But you have these moments where Jazal is realizing like, I am a tragic person. Like I am
Mhm.
screwed in every way, shape, and form. And that's kind of the end of poor old. He lives a disillusioned and resigned life of a puppet king. Um,
Wow.
so that is the little note that I had written about in my wrap up section for Jazal, because every
Yep.
character kind of gets a bit of a wrap up sesh.
Yes. So Glocta installed as pretty much Baez's go-to person to actually
He's like the
take care of
proxy.
things. Well, yeah, the proxy. Like he trusts that Glocta is competent enough to, with a nudge here or there, run the kingdom in the way Baez wants it to be run. And Baez has said since way back, like he's kind of had a respect for Glocta as
Yeah.
much as he can. With he calls people cattle at times. I think he's like
Yes.
Baez views people as cattle on a good day and ants on a bad day
Yeah.
is basically his view. But he has a little bit of respect for Glocta
Mm-hmm.
and kind of thinks you've got what it takes to be my proxy.
Right.
West gets a real messed up end here. He basically is just a consequence to the like this. It's almost like a nuclear. Uh,
Fallout.
uh, yes, exactly.
Because
That comes from Baez.
yeah, Baez killed a lot of people with his magic. Like he just indiscriminately like killed the eaters and then kept going and like felled buildings and um killed people on both sides because there were so many people who were taking shelter in the square, in those buildings that he toppled. And then also there was like kind of that sickness that had a radius around it, and Wes, and his troops had witnessed that like black tornado is kind of how it was described of the power. And there was a sickness that fell over everybody. And yeah, it's tragic to see Wes go that way. Wes was one of my favorite characters. He had so many great, great moments, and to see him done like that was like, dang, that's
Yeah,
tough.
yeah. I think it's an interesting choice from Abercrombie because I guess it's like, hey, yeah, Baez's actions are going to have real consequences and they're going to be deadly.
Right.
And a way to drive that home is to take someone who was a lot of people's favorite characters and a lot of people like West and say, no, he doesn't get this miraculous end. He just dies as a like unthinking casualty of Baez. Baez
Right.
will never even that won't even register for him that he killed West. But
Right.
for us as readers, it's like, dude, Baez,
It also
why?
falls into that like that's life for you kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like what you think every single character in this gets out in some way. It's like someone's just gonna die a senseless death, and that kind of falls into the Abercrombie tone of how he approaches like fantasy stories. It's like some characters, just get sick and die, and West was the one that fell victim to this wasting disease. So that was tragic. I do love with Glocta and Jazal this whole thing with Queen Therese. I love it in like a sick, twisted way. The way that
Well, it's
it's
horrible. It's like,
absolutely but it's twisted. It's horrible, but it's twisted in how horrible it is. It's like a brilliant, horrible thing. Like I have no idea how Abercrombie conceived this idea.
oh yeah.
It's
I
so
mean,
twisted.
I-
Ah,
it is, I think, the most reviling thing Glocta does in the entire series, and that's saying something. Like, I mean, obviously he tortures people and stuff like that, but it's actually like a very disgusting thing that he does here. And immediately after, Glocta does this like great thing of sparing Artie's life,
Yes.
kind of like, I mean, obviously Glocta would like to be married to Artie, and that's how
Yeah, that was a
he
funny
saves her. But
written like moment where it's written like he grabs the cold steel.
yes,
It's
but
like
it's a
she
ring.
doesn't know this horrible fate that's about to come onto her. Where it's like this like written like he's psyching himself
Gonna
up to
stab
stab
Artie,
her, but he's
who
like,
has a Giselle bastard that is brewing there. So
yeah.
that's a
Yes,
loose
that
end that
was
Glocta
a
is told to dealt
fun
with.
reveal there that Artie's pregnant with the king's bastard, which is quite a twist in the like
Yeah.
last couple pages of the book. Is like, oh, that actually has some potential for some intrigue. And
Oh yeah.
Glocta was like basically told to handle it, and the scene is written with like Glocta's self-deprecating humor you take literally, like he's gonna stab her. It's like she doesn't know this horrible fate that's about to that I'm about to inflict on her. I'm grabbing the cold steel. That's how it's written. And then he pulls out a
Yeah.
ring. He's like, will you marry me? And she's like,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I didn't notice it on the first read because I was so like caught up in that the Giselle and Artie thing was supposed to like work out in some way,
Yeah.
and then of course it does not. But on the rereads, I think you get to see how much chemistry Glocta and Artie really have, and you can kind of
Yes.
read it a little bit more as this romantic banter and flirting rather than the like whatever I was reading as the first time, maybe almost more of like an older
Yeah,
brother
well, it's
kind of
so
thing.
funny because you never in the first read would have imagined that situation playing out, that Artie and
Exactly.
Glocta get married. You're like, why would they ever do that? It doesn't make sense. And it wasn't until those final pieces, after even making a magi, that we get revealed that Artie's pregnant and something has to be done with it. And then it all comes together so naturally and it makes sense. But it would have never been in your spectrum. And it reminds you of how much things have progressed throughout this series and how much like setup and payoff there's been. And even in these last 10% of the pages of this book, we're still getting setups and payoffs. And yeah, that this whole Artie thing was one of those. So Glocta marries Artie, and that's like one of the nicest things he's ever done. And you're rooting for him in those moments, and you're happy for him, and you're happy for Artie. And then compare that to what he does with Queen Therese, which is so horrible. He kidnaps her, I guess you would say, romantic interest,
Lover, maybe.
girlfriend, lover, yeah, and is like, if you don't produce an heir with the king, I will do horrible, horrible things to your girlfriend, lover, or whatever, situation. And then you have these moments in Giselle's perspective, which is he thinks that she's opening up to him and is actually turning a corner.
These are hard for me to read,
It's
honestly.
so
It's so
brutal. It's so twisted. And
because Giselle doesn't know what he's doing. I
yes,
mean, in typical
in Giselle's
fashion from
perspective, he's like, this
Abercrombie.
is a breakthrough. This is so great. This is
Yeah,
like amazing. And it's like, oh my god, Giselle, you're clueless to the end, dude. It's like horrible.
yeah,
Oh, it's so twisted. Very much a grimdark situation there. But
yeah.
it just goes to show you what Glock is capable of, and it goes to show you
Well,
how clueless Giselle is.
I think that's what this moment is there to do for Abercrombie. If I have to speculate, is like he- you have to be reminded. Like Glocta's just done this nice thing to cover up Artie's pregnancy with like, oh, it's actually my child. It's not. She doesn't have to die. And then it's like, well, remember that Glocta's in charge of Baez's kingdom here because he is willing to do absolutely brutal things. And this kind of final reminder of that side of Glocta, maybe not final,
Right.
depending on how we take a later moment. But maybe the biggest reminder is this moment with Therese. So, uh, yeah, and yeah, we'll see where these kind of things go in future stuff, maybe. So,
Yeah.
I don't want. Yeah,
Yeah.
we will see if the seeds of the past bear fruit in the present when we get to the later novels in the First Law world. But we got to close out these other storylines
Yeah,
here,
you have
Charles.
Pharaoh, who has at this point has been altered by the seed, and you have this moment even where Logan comes back and talks to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is so um, disassociated with what's happening. She doesn't even
Yes.
recognize Logan. Like this was someone she had like regretted leaving behind, and then when Logan meets her, she's like, "Do you hear that? Quiet. Do you hear that?"
Yeah,
Like not
she's
even
just focused on the
registering that he's
voices.
there. So that's pretty alarming for poor Pharaoh. But
Yeah.
she taps into it and embraces the power of the seed a little bit and goes off on her own in what can be assumed to be her quest for vengeance to murder the Gurkish emperor. And that's kind of the wrap up to her arc. She's kind of irreversibly altered from the seed, but that has given her powers, and we'll see how that goes for her potentially. Who's to say? Uh,
Who is?
who's to say? I did warm up to Pharaoh more in the second read than the first. When you understand more about like her backstory, the fact she has demon blood, and like just how on the nose she was about Baez, like, and
Yeah.
you know all those other things. Like it's easy to see her as just someone who's just pure angst all the time, but you did start to when you got over that, you started to see like more of her character and how like how many walls she has up and like the cracks in her walls are so subtle but so meaningful at the same time, you know. So it was like definitely more appreciative the second time around for her.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Charles. I thought I was gonna have to be the one to come in and talk about Pharaoh here, but I you said it all there, I think.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I don't have too much to say about her other than she benefits from the second read,
yeah.
and we wish her luck in her quest to kill the.
Do we?
I don't know. I mean, Kalula and Baez, neither one of them are any good, but who knows? We wish
Yeah.
her something.
We certainly wish her
As she
something.
goes,
Oh, and you know what I wish, Charles?
yeah.
I wish I didn't move us past the Glocta thing before we talk about Pike being revealed to
Oh, I
be
was gonna get
Salem
there though.
Ruse.
I thought.
Okay.
I was gonna get there at
Get
the
there,
end.
man.
Did I get there? Where did I put that in the notes?
You
Oh,
put it in the
oh,
notes.
I
So
skipped it in the notes.
I moved us along. That was
Yeah.
on me.
Okay. Yeah. So in the notes, okay. So we talked about that stuff with Queen Therese, but then we get the reunite with Glocta and Pike, aka Salem Ruse, which was quite the twist. You're like, okay, and you're kind of wondering why. But then, you know, Salem Ruse or Pike or however we'll call them, is
He's Pike
you
now.
referred in that in the beginning. You were talking about how Glocta was accepting his death and everything like that. But then he was like, "Wait a minute, I can give you what you really want." And you know, Glocta said over and over again the cycle of I was tortured, and then I became the torturer, and then like you order the torturing done, and that was the arc that Glocta has gone through. He's the Arch Lector now. But now you can see that arc kind of beginning for Pike Salem Ruse
Right.
here when he has the choice to kill Glocta and he doesn't. And then now they've got Salt chained up and Glocta unwraps the torturing devices and he's like, well, what are you going to do? And Pike takes his orders, picks up the tools, and the cycle continues, and that's the end of Glocta's arc there.
Well said, Charles.
So
And it's a pretty. I don't know if poetic is ever really the right word for an
it is kind of
Abercrombie
though.
arc. It's got some sense of meaning to it or something. Poetic has the wrong connotation.
It's a
I think,
grimdark poetic.
yeah, a grimdark
Twisted
poem.
poetic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the cycling that continues. You know, Glocta's always asking himself, "Why do I do this?" Throughout the whole series, people have been like, "You'd think that you would. How could you, someone who's experienced these horrible things, become a torturer?" It's like that's the perfect thing for me to do. And Pike has gone through the whole process himself as well and is disfigured.
Yeah.
So it's
And
that.
West is gone, so he's kind of in that situation
Mhm.
with West was his guy who was elevating him and all this stuff. So I feel like Pike is kind of in this situation where he kind of where Glocta was, where it's
Yeah,
like, well,
Wes's death
what else do I
created
have
kind of
left?
like this power vacuum for Artie and for Pike. It was like, what are they going to do now that he's gone? So Glocta to the rescue, I suppose. um,
Yeah, rescue.
yeah, rescue. Like this is Abercrombie's twisted world,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like Abercrombie to their rescue. I guess we wish Pharaoh well. I suppose. Like it's like, what do you make of any of this? And that's just the world that Abercrombie's built. It's left us like, I guess. It's like, what pieces have you left us with, Joe? It's like
Well, those are kind of the speculations that Dogman is having by the end, right, Charles? He's just
great
kind of
seg. Yes.
thank you. Yes, he's just kind of we don't want to do the Dogman dirty.
No.
He's just kind of standing around. Grimm has died, and there's kind of this reflection like her and Grimm like just kind of followed us here and died as like in a war he didn't really understand, in a place he didn't know, and that's just how it goes. And Dogman's just reflecting on like where did this all go wrong, and he has really lost any faith in Logan and those.
But
kind
I
of
will
things. But
say Grimm's final moments were very touching as well. This is part of my 20-minute long thing I could do about Grimm is the ending, right?
This could be a long episode if you go for that.
No, but
it's
like,
already pretty long.
Yeah, we might split it into 2 parts.
Ooh.
It's already at almost 2 hours. So anyway, we have Grimm's, like, he gives his whole like last words. He's like, Logan should have killed me. Everything else has been just like a blessing, or whatever he said it was. Has been gravy, or whatever he said it was, and I was glad to have it.
Yeah.
And it is very touching, and that's like the most he's ever said, except for maybe when he was giving Three Trees his eulogy, which I didn't mention in the last episode, and I was so bummed I didn't. But you know what? We brought it up now. So this whole thing about Grimm, he's so brilliant, and like the payoffs that he's had, the eulogy for Three Trees, and then I guess the eulogy for himself. So that was all touching, and that kind of leaves, that like Grimm was like the last pure thing in this world for Dogman, and he's like left with nothing, and he's gone on to resent Logan to the point where it's like, do whatever you want, Logan. It's like, none of this has brought me any good, and like I'm tired of like running through the woods and like everyone's dead and like all this other horrible stuff. So you know what, do whatever you want. And Logan's basically like, okay, stay behind and work on relations with the Union. I'll see you later. It's like, okay, bye. And that's Dogman.
And Dogman is one of the better people for sure, and probably the best person of the main crew here. I like the point of view characters. I think that's probably fair to say. He never gets his like West moment where it's like, oh well, this guy seems nice, but then it turns out that
he's got this streak.
They've got this. Yeah, it's like Dogman's always kind of just like this chill, well-meaning dude, and he kind of ends the story. This chill, well-meaning dude, but wondering like, how was I trying to live my life as a chill, well-meaning dude? Because
Bias had said that the age is ending and a new age is starting, and I kind of feel that with Dogman. Dogman's kind of left with like the end of an era, the end of an age, and he's left with nothing. He's like, what? Like, how do I make sense of this world anymore? Because Bethod's gone, all his friends are gone, all the politics he was fighting in is swept off the board, and now he's just kind of left there alone. So it's like, what is he supposed to do? And that's kind of his tragic ending, is like all his good intentions, like trying to make a good life for himself, and he's just as worse off, if not even more worse off than he was at the beginning, running around in the woods trying to flee Bethod. So it's like,
well, you mentioned the beginning, Charles, and that just so happens to be the title of
another brilliant seg.
Yeah, that's not in the notes. We keep referencing the notes. For the record, these segs, that's all natural. That's so yeah, it's not. There's no like Charles says beginning. Dylan comes in with the big seg. Charles tells him how great he is, and the FTF podcast continues. There is,
Yeah, I think fans would
it's
be
just a list.
disappointed to see the notes. Like there may be a few fun jokes in here, like making a magi, but it's not like we write a lot of this stuff down. It's just kind of bullet points of the story, so we don't forget.
It's all plot summary.
Yeah.
I've actually been. Well, we'll talk. I don't want to say we'll do something and then on the air now and then have people expecting it. But I have some thoughts about the notes. But anyway, the thing that we get here is that last chapter called The Beginning, which contrasts with the first chapter, which is the first chapter of the Blade itself I'm talking about. So all the way
whole
back,
trilogy.
first chapter of the first Law is called The End, and that feels more as Abercrombie as it gets, right? So we get to our final chapter, The Beginning, and it's Logan returning to the North, thinking, okay, well, finally we solved all of this. Now time for me to just take a seat. But there's someone who has other ideas, Charles.
That is right. We get the big reveal. Logan, we can already see that his kingdom's kind of crumbling around him a little bit. People are only following him because they fear him, basically, and he challenges anyone that kind of grumbles around him. And so by the time he returns north, it's no surprise. Black Dow has already sat himself on the throne. And it's kind of funny to go back now where Logan's like, well, someone will need to stay here and root out these people. But I was like, oh, I'll do it. Have fun, guys. Like, don't worry about me. Like, I'll go ahead and do it. So it's like my second time reading it, I'm like, oh, Dow had this planned from the beginning. Like, he was always, a thorn in everyone's side. And it's no surprise that he continues to be. And he actually challenges Logan. We get a few other moments here. We see that Shivers.
While we're talking about the build-up with Dow,
yes,
there's fantastic foreshadowing for this, even way earlier in this novel, where you're having these interactions where it feels like it's just kind of Logan trying to manage all these personalities.
Yeah.
In the North with these named men, and one of them is Dow. The hardest one to manage is Dow. And there's this discussion where Dow is legitimately asking Logan, like, okay, so you're fighting against Bethod. Like, how'd you know when it was time to no longer serve Bethod? And I wonder what Dow's considering.
Yeah.
And then Logan's kind of talking to him, and at some point Dow says to Logan, or maybe there ain't room on one side for two bastards as big as the pair of ya. And Logan replies, oh, I don't know. You and me work real sweet together. It's like, well, we'll see about that. Yeah. Dow always, throughout this book, you can tell he's been
it started with the power struggle.
He's...
Once Logan left their crew, Dow was, campaigning to be the leader. He's always been the one that's been the hardest to manage. It fits really well with his, do you think that the rest of the world stops because Logan's in Adua? It's like, no. Black Dow's running in the show in the North.
Yeah, that he is. He's been trying out talking, so he talked to Calder and Scale instead of finding them and killing them. And those are Bethod's sons. And he's been plotting this for a while. He takes his opportunity, and he's reached a point where he legitimately thinks Logan is... I buy that Black Dow legitimately thinks Logan is worse than him.
Yeah.
Worse than Black Dow is.
I would agree, and I think Logan certainly earned the title. We've seen him kill Cromwell Fail's son and kill Tall Duru Thunderhead and, anyone else besides. And we've seen him time and time again choose more scores over peace, So it's like, yeah, he's horrible. There's nothing else to say about it. As long as he's in power, he's just going to kill more people and cause more conflict. And I think that's what Black Dow was trying to say. He's like, I tried talking, It's like, you're evil and you got to go. Not a bad case.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have a good quote I'll drop in a bit, but I know you were getting to Shivers' moment there. And I love this moment from Shivers, which is that Dow had Shivers in on the plot of like, okay, you're gonna kill Logan, he won't see it coming, and Shivers is just like got a chance to do that. He could have ended Logan, and Logan ends up getting a little bit more of a shot to fight because Shivers decides like, no, I'm just not doing it. He just like throws his weapon aside and walks out. And the Shivers arc so far has been one of like, he always wanted to settle a score with Logan. He always like had Logan as his big enemy, and his he's Rattleneck's son, so his brother got killed by Logan in really messed up fashion. But Shivers is someone who actually like listens to people around him here, and he takes the Dogman's advice, which was given earlier, which was basically like blood only gets more blood. Like you don't want to settle scores because all that does is bring about more, and Shivers kind of gets some of this redemption to the end of this arc that we were maybe hoping Logan was going to get.
That's true. I mean, he learned the lesson just by watching the people around him. It's just like, forget all of this. And he's been tempted like this whole time. He's had multiple opportunities to kill Logan. He's even saved Logan's life. So more than once now with this act of like walking away. So, yep, really nice little moment for Shivers. He was always kind of like this. Will he like wild card thing with Logan? It's like, is he gonna take this moment to exact revenge on Logan or not? And in the end, he's the only one that learned this lesson besides maybe Dogman, but Dogman learned it the hard way.
Right. And then, yeah, we get this moment, Charles, where kind of Logan's scrambling. There's a bunch of people around him. So, and Black Dow is a great fighter in his own right, and Logan's a little more in rough shape and outnumbered. And he gets this one chance to see if he can escape, and he basically just jumps out a window and starts falling toward the water, just in the way that this all started back in the Blade itself. And we get some great like
you get like all of his isms coming together.
It's
like, and there's only one choice left, and that's no choice at all. Best to do it without live with the fear of doing it. And then he's in the water, and it's like, say one thing about Logan.
It does cut off in the middle of that. It's so good. So I think in Logan's arc, it's interesting. I think Dow kind of says the thesis of that arc in some ways to Logan at the end here, where they're fighting, and Black Dow's kind of like, look, I'm a bad person.
No one's
speaking about
debating
himself, Dow. But I know that Black Dow, know I am a villain, a real bad dude, and he says and Logan's like, I should have killed you. And Dow says, yeah, you should have, but you love to play the good man, don't you? You know what's worse than a villain? A villain who thinks he's a hero. A man like that, there's nothing he won't do, and he'll always find himself an excuse.
Yeah. That's a tough realization for all us Logan fans.
Yeah.
To think of Logan in that light. But that's, he's done things like sacrifice the cooking pot to save Kwai, but he's also like created more conflict and violence than anyone else, except maybe Bias. But it's like, in the North.
I mean, Logan's had way less time, so I think, and just doesn't have the scheming of a Baez to cause that much death on that big a scale. But it's a good point.
Of the Northmen, no one's caused more senseless death and violence than him. And to think that he's like, in his mind, he's this tragic character, when in reality he's this
leaves on the water. That's what he says.
Yeah, when in reality everyone sees him as this feared, like, force of violence. It's a deadly combination, and it's very well said by Black Dow, and it's It's another sad thing to realize because I think we all are Logan fans and love him as a character, and then it's a bitter pill to swallow in these last moments with Black Dahlia, who's basically reaffirming what Bethod said, just a little more
Yes.
close to home.
Yeah, exactly, Charles. It's uh, if that was the nail in the coffin, this is the final word, and
Truth.
it drives it home extremely well. So, and I like to think that you and I hopefully have have driven this episode home.
Okay,
Well, did
okay.
I do it
Decent
or
seg, decent. You've had better today, but that one
yeah?
was still good.
Not my top one. But I also didn't say it with the confidence
Yeah, the
because I
delivery.
was
I mean, it
like,
was just this is a totally fine seg, but you're like, yeah.
I kind of knew it wasn't as good, and yeah, just didn't. Well, I also was like, is there more Charles wants to talk about? I don't
Yeah. No,
know. So I wanted to leave it open.
I appreciate that, man. But you know what? Like, we got to the end of the story. We got to everyone's arcs. I think if there's more we want to say, we can just do more episodes.
Yes, I think we will.
But I think our conversation for today is done. And with that, we close the books on the
Yeah.
first Law trilogy. And we go into a Friends Pitching Fantasy, I believe, is on the schedule. And then we go into Wheel of Time, which is a very ambitious journey for us. I think it will be interesting to compare these two works. So, looking forward to getting that kind of perspective through the Wheel of Time. And yeah, this is part of our year-long goal to have read all of the First Law books by the September when Wisdom of Crowds is released.
Right.
So that is very exciting, and we got some standalones to read before then, and I'm looking forward to it, man.
The first couple of Age of Madness after that.
Yes.
And I think we should read Sharp Ends because, Charles, if you want to know the truth behind the story of Rattleneck's son, there is a short story that tells that.
I do want to know that, and I just have to say, like, the experience of reading Abercrombie is such a pleasurable one. Like, sometimes you read a book and it's the pages fly by, and you're just enraptured by it the whole time, and it's funny and it's tragic and it's exciting and like everything a good fantasy book should be. And like the experience of reading this series is just so good. As far under the lens of entertainment, it's one of the best we've read. Like,
oh yeah,
just so much fun.
I mean, you don't have to tell me twice. Yeah, no, we had a listener reach out for some recs and was like, "What do you suggest?" You and Charles seem to really like Joe Abercrombie.
That's a great
place
to go if you have read.
You caught us. Yeah.
No, we like to think of ourselves as some pretty intense Abercrombie fans. Dylan has been campaigning for Abercrombie for many years, and this is your third or fourth time reading the series. So, it's been great, and I'm looking forward to. I've only read the only other book I've read by Abercrombie is Best Served Cold, which is the next one we'll read on the show when we get to it. So after that, it's new ground, and I am excited. I'm excited.
I'm pumped too. It's so interesting. Yeah, I'm very excited to kind of be there along for the ride in your first reactions to some of these. I mean, I think this was in my Friends Pitching Fantasy originally too. I think that Abercrombie basically gets better with every successive book. There's a little maybe hedging I would do around that. That's a very absolute statement, but the general trend and the trend of Goodreads ratings as well is that each book is rated higher than the last. I think. I'm trying to remember if that's true for best. I think it is. And it's, I mean, Age of Madness for me, I like even better so far than the First Law.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I'm excited.
How good it is.
I'm excited, man. Can't wait. We got a little reading to do before then. But you're gonna read.
Yes.
We gotta read
That we do.
3 books of the Wheel of Time, whatever we do in this next cycle of FPF, and then we're back to Abercrombie. It might take a few months, but we'll get there eventually, and I am looking forward to it greatly.
Yeah. I think we've only got one task left to do, Charles, and
That's
I
no
think
choice at all.
it's better to do it than live with the fear of it at this point. Get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, my good friend.
Yes, sir. As you say, so it shall be done. Thank you, everybody, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. This has been your host, Charles and Dylan, coming at you with another exciting buddy read, and what a ride that was. If you like what you heard today and you want to reach out to us, get involved, social media is a great place to do that, especially Twitter over at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF Podcast. You're always welcome to shoot us an email as well. A couple of those have been trickling in. They've been fun to go back and forth with. Be a part of that conversation over at the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Now, Dylan, if they wanted to show their support for the show in a way that was free and relatively easy for them to do, and they just so happen to be on Apple Podcasts right now, what can they do?
They can scroll down on our Apple Podcast page until they see those 5 stars, and then they can toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just gotta click 5 of them. That would be great. A review is even better if you do have time, but just listening, that's enough. We love it.
Listening, guys. Thank you so much. We made it to the end of the series, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you all for listening, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.